Wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'dah amma ba'd. First of all, apology from me for the fact that we had to bring it a bit forward. In one way, it is beneficial for some of the brothers and sisters living abroad in Pakistan and in India because of the time difference. So they would have earlier start and hopefully earlier end. The reason being that in UK, especially in the West, time changes quite quickly. So we are now stuck between two prayers. If we did it after 6, that would be a bit too late. And our Maghrib starts at roughly 10 past 6. And Asr is 4:45. So we just decided, inshallah ta'ala, that for the next couple of weeks, when the time and the clocks go forward by an hour, we would keep it to 5 to 6, between 5 and 6. So we will finish straight at 6 o'clock so that we can, inshallah ta'ala, manage with our Maghrib in Jama'ah. Okay, so with that, I would hand over to Sheikh, who is already here with us. So, Jazakallahu khairah.
Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Can you all hear me?
Yes, very clearly, mashallah.
Brilliant. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina wa Habibina wa Nabiyana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. Assalamu alaikum to one and all. Okay, alhamdulillah, we're going through this particular article, which I hope that everyone has the link for. Kalam and the Hanbalis, is it really relevant today? Kalam and the Hanbalis, being in the Hanbali school, is it really relevant today? And there are 3 parts to this. The article then addresses the overall nature of ilmul kalam, the science of discursive theology, a theology which is rooted in rational principles. And there's a historical reason why we went that we discussed why that had to be the case. So that's Kalam. The Hanbalis, because the Hanbali school is generally considered, rightly or wrongly, to be the school that is anti-Kalam. Okay, anti-Kalam. And sometimes in the writing of Western Islamic studies, you'll find the Hanbali school being described as anti-rationalist, or the Hanbali scholars being described as anti-rationalist. And then the last bit of the title, Kalam and the Hanbalis, is it really relevant today? That bit is to do with Kalam. Is Kalam theology, as given to us by the great medieval theologians within the Sunni tradition, is it really relevant today in terms of being able to address the huge issues of our time, those issues that have sown a great deal of doubt in the minds of people, in the minds of Muslims, as some of these issues had sown doubts in the minds of Christians and Jews decades before or centuries before. Issues like, for example, evolution. Hasn't evolution disproven the religious account of human beings? Hasn't modern cosmology or astrophysics really dispensed with the need to involve God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the overall story of creation? Isn't modern quantum physics beginning to tell us that actually nothing can be determined, so there could never be anything such as predestination or pre-decree, because simply when you get down to the atomic level, nothing is really fixed or determined, it's undetermined. So does Kalam theology, as was given to us by the great theologians of the past, is it a useful tool for dealing with these kind of issues and problems, leaving alone quantum physics? But the first two are the cause of probably it won't be an exaggeration if I say over the course of the last 200 years, hundreds of thousands of people's faith to be eroded. Now, I don't want to equate Iman and faith to be the same thing. Christian faith or Jewish faith is not equal to Muslim Iman. But so just, just bear that in mind. But I'm just going to generalize and say that people who, Christians and Jews who did believe in God and who did believe in prophethood and who did believe in some kind of heavenly scripture and revelation, despite the falsity creeping in, many of them left their religious connections, a lot of them because evolution and modern cosmology seems to have answered the questions without the need to involve God in the equation. Of course, there are other reasons why droves and droves of people leave religious practice. Bad behavior of religious people is one of the things that puts off a lot of people. The wars that religion historically has been the cause of is another great reason. I'm not saying that all these reasons are justified or not justified. I'm just saying that let us understand what is driving people away from God and religion. Okay, and another reason is that this is a day and an age in which more and more people don't like to be told what to do. We are not like our parents' generation, who who were born in around about or just before World War I or World War II or just after World War II. And that kind of generation was probably the last generation, at least in the West, whereby there would be deference. They would respect their parents and dutifully be told what to do, and they would carry on doing it. But the 1960s, and this is important to understand, the 1960s, the late 1960s, is what in the West, in Britain, in America, in Northern Europe, we call the Cultural Revolution. The 1960s didn't just change fashion and pop music and movies. It changed significantly the mentality. And so we became a society that no longer deferred to higher principles, to higher authority. Everything was open to criticism and rejection, whether it's the royal family, whether it's the politicians, whatever it be. And the state of individualism, the philosophy of individualism, that, I would decide for myself what is right and wrong, and nothing above my choice can ever take precedence. And that's really where we are now. And that's another reason for people turning their back on religion, because religion tells them to do too many things and they don't want to be told what to do. So there are a variety of reasons. But if we take the first two, the issue is, can Kalam address these issues? Of course, we can, as Muslims, we can say, you know what, we won't address these issues. We will bury our heads in the sand like an ostrich, okay? And hopefully these philosophies and ideas will just pass by and everything will be okay. And I think we all know here that that's an irresponsible attitude to take. In fact, one could go as far as to say it is an irreligious attitude to take. Religion is not meant for 2 or 3 people in a cave, somewhere in a cave, doing Allah, Allah. Okay, religion is meant for society as a whole, and the prophets and the messengers, alayhimus salatu wassalam, they were from the Ahlul Qura, the people of the towns and cities. They were not Bedouins and somewhere over there away from people. Each prophet, alayhimus salatu wassalam, they came to people and to their particular societies. And then the Prophet ﷺ comes not just to his society, but to the entire world. So this is what we're discussing. And the best way to discuss this, as the scholar says, man lam yutqin al-usul hurim al-wusul, whoever doesn't safeguard the foundations will be prevented from the goal. And so because there was some kind of misconceptions, confusions, questions about what is Kalam and how different is it than philosophy? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Why the need for Kalam? Why not? What is the difference between Kalam and straightforward Aqidah? And these kind of questions that that many of you raised, which was the reason why we actually started having these classes. I thought the best way to do this is piecemeal. So remember, there are some here today who have studied Kalam theology for a number of years. There are some here today who they are just acquainting themselves with the idea of ilm al-kalam. And there are some in between. And we're going to try to cater for everybody, not just specialists. Okay, so if you could turn to that article, Kalam and the Hanbalis, is it really relevant today? We went through points 1 to all the way up to, we got up to point 8, where 2 weeks ago, point 8 was, of all of the scholarly groupings, the outright rejection of Kalam is usually associated with the Hanbalis. And then point 8 and 9 and 10, point 8, 9, 10, and 11, those 4 points discussed the Hanbali position on Kalam. And we came to find out from the authoritative sources, not secondhand sources, not Shafis and Hanafis telling us what the Hanbali position is. No, we don't do that silliness. Okay, not some Western academic telling us what the Hanbali position is, but from the Hanbali ulama themselves, especially the classical Hanbali scholars and their works themselves. What is the position of the Hanbalis in terms of a Sunni form of ilmul kalam? And we saw 2 weeks ago that the school is split. It doesn't have one unified view. Unlike the Hanafi school, unlike the Hanafi scholars who in general accepted ilmul kalam, and their form of ilm al-kalam was represented by the Maturidi theological school. And unlike the Malikis and the Shafis, who on the whole, again, barring a few exceptions, accepted ilm al-kalam, best represented by the Ash'ari school of theology, the Hanbalis, you can't say the majority of them did or the majority of them didn't. And I'm not quite sure if you can say it's a 50-50 split. But there is, as we saw 2 weeks ago, a clear split. What is that split? One group of Hanbali scholars continued to detest ilm al-kalam, even if it was used for Sunni reasons, to support the Sunni Aqidah. And they inferred from the many statements of Imam Ahmad in his refutation, in his rudud, in his dham, in his censure of Kalam, they continue to follow what they believe to be that tradition, that Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rejected Kalam lock, stock and barrel, mutlaqan, in totality. People who champion that view from the great Hanbali Imams, so we're not talking about middle-ranked Hanbali Imams or just, low-level Hanbali Imams, we're talking about the great Hanbali Imams, okay? Those who championed that view were people like Imam Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, and his teacher before him, or at least one of his teachers before him, Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. It seems to be up until the 8th century, up until the 8th Islamic century, it seems to be the majority position of the Hanbali jurists, the Hanbali fuqaha, who some of who were theologians as well, that there was a strong rejection of all types of kalam as expressed in the number of books by Ibn Qudama. Ibn Qudama has his famous Lum'atul I'tiqad, which has been translated as well into English. But he has about 7 or 8 other books and booklets on subjects of Aqidah or topics of Aqidah. And in all of those, there is a strong rejection of Kalam. We also know a strong rejection of Kalam from Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani through his various writings, and also the fact that Ibn Qudama was one of the last main students to study with Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. I think he studied for 50 days, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, Qaddasallahu ruhahu, he passed away in the year 561 Hijri. Ibn Qudama and his cousin studied with, were the last of the great scholars to study with the Sheikh for about 50 days. And we know other Hanbalis. So that's one group amongst the Hanbalis, anti-Kalam. Anti-Kalam with some anti-Ash'ari statements. The other group, expressed by people like Qadi Abu Ya'la and Ibn Hamdan, they were pro-Kalam in the sense that they believe that there are a few reports from Imam Ahmad, not only in his attack on Kalam, but actually on his allowance of Kalam if there is a need to do so. If there is no need, don't bother. But where there is a need, use as much of it as fits the purpose. And that view, as I said, was championed, as we read last time, by a group of Hanbali scholars. By the 9th Islamic century, that view becomes much more normative in the Hanbali school. By the 8th or the 9th Islamic century, I'd have to go back to be a bit more precise, but by the 8th or the 9th Islamic century, that second view, the view of Ibn Hamdan and others, becomes the normative view of the Hanbali jurists. That is to say, those Hanbali imams who authored Matun, who authored texts on Hanbali fiqh, or commentaries on the classical texts of Hanbali fiqh, those fuqaha, those jurists, nearly all of them inclined or adopted the position of the allowance of ilmul kalam to defend the Sunni aqidah. Today, we're on point 12, and then we finish with point 13 before we move on to the final section, which is what was the role of ilmul kalam in pre-modern times. And there, to the end of the article, we really engage Imam al-Ghazali. We really engage Imam al-Ghazali because, subhanAllah, not only is he one of the greatest of the mutakallimun from within the Sunni tradition, but he is also one of the, he's also one of the people who has the greatest sense of insaf, okay? Justice is rare, okay? And sometimes even great scholars can become a bit lopsided. And al-Ghazali, he's, forget about his academic brilliance, but his sincere honesty and the fact that he reminded the ulama class that, you know what, it's not about this science and this fun and this ilm and these ulum, it's about Allah. And if you've forgotten that, then you can't even be called an alim in the true sense of the word. Okay, really, that's the Ghazalian project. That ilm is needed. Ilm is serious stuff, but it's a wasila to a ghaya, it's a means to a goal. And the goal is God. The goal is Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. Okay, and so al-Ghazali, which we'll end with, not today, but in the weeks to follow, he tells us how it is and what was ilm al-kalam used for. And as he himself says, if you would have heard it from other than me, Al-Ghazali saying, if you would have heard the words that I'm going to say from other than myself, who you know me as a mutakallim, you would never have believed these things. But I am telling you, that's what Al-Ghazali says. But for today, we still carry on with the Hanbali school and Ilm al-Kalam by briefly looking at Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's position, point 12, and then finishing with point 13, what conclusions can we draw about the Hanbali school view on Ilm al-Kalam? Okay. Dr. Salim will testify to the fact that whilst I do have a deep admiration for Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, and there is so much of Taymiyyan ideas, attitudes, and orientation and methodology that shape me as an individual academic. Dr. Salim, inshallah, will also testify that I am not averse to accepting that Ibn Taymiyyah was wrong here, or that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah's views could, when it comes to people with the lesser intellects and lesser spiritual realization, could become a source of fitna. I have no problem accepting those things if they're argued well, or if they're justified with sound evidences. Ibn Taymiyyah simply isn't the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, I mean, obviously that's obvious, but I want to make that clear. And neither do I believe the Hanbali school, which is what I follow since the early 1990s. That is my school of fiqh. Neither do I believe that the Hanbali school is infallible, but it is one of the few remaining schools that is a means to know how to worship Allah in the furu' of the deen, in the detailed fiqhi issues of the deen. So really, again, it's not a matter of proudly wearing the badge, I am Hanbali, I am Hanafi, I am Shafi'i. No, one doesn't wear such badges proudly. One is just, one just follows the fiqh that they follow, but not to make any schisms out of it. And nor do I ascribe to, and nor would I encourage anyone to ascribe to those views which normally come from ta'assub and hizbiyya, bigotry and partisanship, that the Hanbali school or the Hanafi school or the Shafi'i school is better than the Maliki school, or this school is better than that school, and this sheikh was better than that sheikh, unless of course the ulama themselves are united about it. Unless of course the ulama themselves are all agreed. And of course, there is no agreement of the ulama that the Hanafi school is the best school. The Hanafis might say that, but the Shafis and the Malikis and the Hanbalis don't. And there is no agreement that the Shafi school is the best school. The Shafis may say that, but the rest of them don't. So we need to get this poison out of the heart and just understand that Allah blessed us with having these schools, or at least these remaining schools, as a means to know how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we know the murad al-shari'. We know the murad of the shari'. We know the intent of the lawgiver, and we need a mujtahid to put ourselves between us and Allah in knowing the intent of Allah in detailed aspects of revelation. Otherwise, in the general aspects of revelation, do not drink, be kind to parents, do not steal, fast in the month of Ramadan. We don't need anyone between us and Allah. The book of Allah is clear. But in the details, ala sabil al-mithal, for example, does using an asthmatic spray pump in the month of Ramadan whilst the person is fasting, and then he or she has a mild asthma attack whilst fasting, and one uses the spray pump, does it break the fast, nullify the fast? or does it not nullify the fast? Leaving alone the issue of should an asthmatic person be fasting in Ramadan, leaving that, but just they are. Well, actually, this is something which is not clear in the Quran or the Hadiths, and nor is there an ijma about. This requires minute understanding of murad al-shari', the intent of the lawgiver in the text of the Quran, in the text of the Hadith. Okay, so with that being said, let's read Ibn Taymiyyah and Kalam. Point 12. Is that okay, Dr. Salim?
Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh. Definitely. Can you share your slides? It would be better, or the screen, if that's possible. Otherwise, we can share it from here.
Yes, you know, I could share it if you could remind me how to, or would it be simpler for you to do it?
Yes, I can do it, inshallah. Let me do it.
And remember to scroll up when I'm reading.
No problem, we'll do.
Bless you. Point 12. MashaAllah. So, point 12. As for Ibn Taymiyyah, his take on Kalam and its nomenclature, very posh word, people don't use that. Nomenclature is, anybody want to chip in here? What do we mean by nomenclature or nomenclature?
Sir, it is the different terms which are associated with the
Fantastic.
science.
Allah bless you. Absolutely. Nomenclature or nomenclature just means terms and terminology. Nomen from Latin, which means to name or label something. So as for Ibn Taymiyyah, his take on Kalam and its terminologies, nomenclature, as involved and highly complicated as it is most likely best represented in the passage from him. And we're going to read this short passage in a minute. But look how I've expressed this. As for Ibn Taymiyyah, his take on Kalam and its nomenclature, as involved and highly complicated as it is best, or is most likely best represented in this passage from him. Because ever since the late 1980s, when I started reading Ibn Taymiyyah, and coming from a Salafi background, studied with some of the Salafi mashayikh directly and indirectly, sometimes through audio cassettes of their lessons, sometimes actually in their class. Some of the Aqidah books of Ibn Taymiyyah, even though that's the case, and I still refer back to the writings and the fatwa of Ibn Taymiyyah even today. So I'm quite familiar with a lot of Ibn Taymiyyah's approach and writing. Even then, understanding his take on Kalam or even philosophy is really difficult. First and foremost, even if you studied his well-known books, Aqidah Wasitiyya, Aqidah Tadmuriyya, for example, which are the two that the Salafi scholars normally highlight and teach, that doesn't go into, they are real simple books, and it doesn't go into at all any philosophy or any deep Kalam issues. But if you read his book on Dars-o-Tadrees al-Aql ma'a al-Naql, his book where he tries to discuss how aql, rational thought, and naql, religious texts and revelation, how actually they won't contradict each other, then he does this in 8 volumes, in 8 modern volumes. It's deep. The language is deep. The ibarat, the expressions are very difficult to understand. And we already have to know medieval philosophy and theology to even begin to understand what he is saying and why he is saying it. If we look at his reply to one of Fakhruddin Razi's book, one of Imam al-Razi's books on Kalam, again, it's really deep, and it's really difficult to sometimes pick out what Ibn Taymiyyah is overall trying to say, simply because Ibn Taymiyyah is not, he doesn't structure his material very well. It goes all over the place. You can start with something and then he takes a digression, and then in that digression, he takes another digression, and in that digression, he can take even another digression. So there has to be a lot of patience with Ibn Taymiyyah, let alone having the depth of understanding the thoughts, just to get what he does say and what he doesn't say. And it has been my unfortunate experience that those who criticize Ibn Taymiyyah, even from some of the ulama, you can tell straight away they have either not read him firsthand and they're relying upon secondary reports, and they've misunderstood him. Not everyone, of course, not everyone, but a lot of the time that happens. And this befits some lalupanju, some riffraff. This doesn't befit a person who's trying to take his iman and his suluk to Allah seriously, let alone someone who is upon the path of being an alim or a muhaqqiq, a researcher, verified scholar. So I'm suggesting to you here, this probably is the best representation of Ibn Taymiyyah, but I could be wrong. So as for Ibn Taymiyyah, his take on Kalam and its nomenclature, as involved and highly complicated as it is most likely best represented in this passage from him. Quote, the point being is that Ahmad, meaning Imam Ahmad, would infer by way of rational proofs about propositions concerning divinity, provided they were sound. What Imam Ahmad, what he censured was whatever opposed the book or the Sunnah, speech without knowledge, or speech with innovated meanings in the religion. He, and Imam Ahmad, was not averse to, if the meaning of the book or the Sunnah were known, leaving textual terms for other terminologies if a need for this presented itself. In fact, he did this himself. Rather, what he despised were innovated meanings in this, i.e. in theological issues people were arguing about, such as the nature of the Quran, the beatific vision of Allah, predestiny, or the divine attributes, except what conforms to the book, the Sunnah, or a report from the Sahaba or Tabi'un. End of quote. So here, can anyone give me an idea of what Ibn Taymiyyah is trying to say here about his position on Kalam, or at least what he considers to be Imam Ahmad's position on Kalam? What's the thing that he was okay with, and what was the thing that was the problem in the eyes of Ibn Taymiyyah? I know you've read this only for the first time, so it will take time to think, but is there anything that stands out as, oh, okay, I can see one of his clear objections? Anybody?
So what I can make out of this is that on the issues which were concerning all those terminologies or attacks which are in very much Greek terms or in Greek philosophical terms, according to Hazrat Taymiyyah, they could be defended using the Kalam, or those things which have not been already spoken about in the Quran and the Sunnah. If issues like those arise, they can be answered. But what has already been said, we cannot, or we should not indulge in those.
Right. Okay. MashaAllah. That's a really good initial observation. It's not quite correct, but MashaAllah, Allah bless you. You're beginning to tease out the right stuff. Okay. It's something to do with the terminology. Okay. Ibn Taymiyyah's problem, and he believed that this was Imam Ahmad's biggest problem about Kalam, is that Kalam theology ends up using alien terms, foreign terms, terms that are not found in the Quran and the Sunnah, which in and of itself is not a problem. But once you use a term and it has more than one way to define it or you're defining it one way and are rigid on it, but maybe it could be defined another way, then it's as if some other terminology is coming and becoming a hakim, a judge over the terminology of revelation, let alone the fact that some of these terminologies, these new terminologies, are not clear. So let's read on, and I think I give at least one example. So after that quote, Ibn Taymiyyah's, so are we there? So it's, we're here now. Oh, I can't know. I can't highlight the screen because it's yeah. So just so I highlight it from the next. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Ibn Taymiyyah's point is that using Kalam terminology is risky. For while the correct sense of the meanings may be established, such terms all too easily lend themselves to notions that are false, ambiguous, or inappropriate for Allah, or are at odds with the established text or Salaf reports. His main contention appears to be with the Kalam conception of, okay, so we're going to touch upon Ilmul Kalam a little bit, okay. His main contention appears to be with the Kalam conception of Hulul al-Hawadith, Hulul al-Hawadith, that contingencies do not indwell in the divine essence. So before I move on, okay, let me read it. That contingencies do not indwell in the divine essence, and how such an ambiguous turn of phrase, whilst perfectly sound from one angle, that nothing created subsists in God and that God's attributes aren't created, is used to negate those acts of God he designates, Ibn Taymiyyah designates as the af'alul ikhtiyariyah, God's chosen acts, in that God acts, he creates, and he speaks as he wills, whenever he wills. Okay, so don't worry about the detail now. All it is worth knowing right now is that Ibn Taymiyyah believes that Imam Ahmad's biggest problem with Kalam was that new types of terminology may not be so clear and could lead to misunderstanding, or can lead to innovating ideas in Islam and in theology. And Imam Ahmad was very skeptical very concerned about this, and so was Ibn Taymiyyah. So it's not that one shouldn't use rational arguments to shore up the Sunni Aqidah, the Aqidah of ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, that's which I and my companions belong or are upon. No, we can use rational arguments, but by the time we use specific terminologies which do not come from within the text of the Quran or the Sunnah or the speech of the Salaf, the Sahaba, the Tabi'un, for example, then we're going to use speech or principles from outside of our tradition. We're in danger of creating a lot of confusion and making those terminologies hakim, a judge and jury over the meanings of revelation. That is his main gripe. So Ibn Taymiyyah is one of those Hanbalis who fits into the second camp. He is not against Ilmul Kalam. He accepts Ilmul Kalam. He dived deep into Ilmul Kalam such that the Hanbalis of his time, even those who were okay with Ilmul Kalam, were unhappy with the depth that Ibn Taymiyyah went into, because they believe that by the time you go deeper and deeper and deeper into it, you will make more and more and more mistakes, and it becomes less and less and less befitting to talk about Allah Jalla Jalaluhu in such abstract terms, because it doesn't add to the majd the glory of God. It actually, you know, the humbly say it actually isn't, it isn't praise of God. It's just like abstracting Allah. Okay, and that's why many of them didn't like Ibn Taymiyyah's depth of Kalam, even those who accepted you can use Ilm al-Kalam. And if you want to see the depth of Kalam, just pick up Ibn Taymiyyah's book where he refutes some of Ar-Razi's positions. And you will see that really this is not something that is going to inspire anyone's Iman. It's not going to help nurture any sense of ma'rifah of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu. It's not going to do anything other than what it's there for, which is just kind of making theology in its very detail straight. And the example that I gave, which I thought sums it all up, and it probably does for those who know Ilm al-Kalam, there is a principle in Ilm al-Kalam that the idea of hulul al-hawadith, okay, or hawadith. Haditha is an event, or haditha is anything that is created. In the language of theology, haditha, plural hawadith, refers to anything created, anything. There is Allah, okay, and then there is his creation, and all his creation are haditha. That is to say, they came into existence after non-existence by the will and the creative act of Allah. They came into existence, hadith, something which is created or contingent, to use a better scholarly word, something that is created or contingent. In Arabic is called, in Kalam is called haditha, hawadith, huduth. Something that came into existence after non-existence, okay? And of course, we know that it could have only done so by the will and the creative act of God, kun fayakun, be and it is kind of thing. So hulul al-hawadith, these contingencies do not indwell in Allah. So Ibn Taymiyyah says, lovely. On the one hand, this is absolutely true. It's not like there is Allah and then his attribute of ilm, Allah's attribute of knowledge. It's not as if there was Allah and in the beginning Allah didn't have the attribute of knowledge and later on he had the attribute of knowledge. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always had the sifa, the attribute of knowledge, you know, and there is no beginning to it. There's no beginning to Allah, there's no beginning to his attribute of knowledge. So the right aqidah is that Allah, along with his attributes, are eternal. They have always been, they will always be. Allah has always been and will always be along with his attributes. Now, someone will think, okay, so what's the big deal about that? The big deal was that the Mu'tazilite had a slightly different view, and some other people in those early days had some other views. And you know, by the time you flesh it out rationally, it takes, you know, you can see the mess that it creates. But the point being is, Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, yes, there is no hulul al-hawadith. There are no contingencies that subsist in Allah. There's nothing created that exists in Allah. Allah, you know, Allah is not a creation. No one created God. It's not the case of, you know, who created God? No, Allah has always been. Allah has no beginning. He was there in pre-eternity. Allah has no end. He will always be there. nothing sustains Allah. Allah is Allah. He self-contained, sustains himself, subhanahu wa ta'ala. But from another angle, Ibn Taymiyyah, this is Ibn Taymiyyah, is saying, well, you do have hadiths that or verses of the Quran that Allah spoke to Moses. Okay, Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam. Or that Allah descends to the lowest heaven every last third of the night. Okay, let's just take Allah spoke to Moses, which is in the Quran. Ibn Taymiyyah is saying, well, however Allah wants to, Allah can, within the space-time continuum of human existence, within the space-time continuum of human existence, Allah can speak to whomever he wants, whenever he wills. So according to Ibn Taymiyyah, and I'm simplifying his argument, Allah is not a distant God who created and then left everything to be as it is, and he doesn't. No, Allah is he's an active agent. He responds to our prayers when we make them, inshallah. Okay. He punishes, he rewards, he's doing that now. Okay. He speaks, he spoke to prophets like he spoke to Musa alayhi salam, although he speaks to prophets in different ways, in different methods. But Ibn Taymiyyah is saying that let's say Musa alayhi salam was around, if we say Ibrahim alayhi salam was around 2500 BC, roughly, okay, these are not factual, but roughly Ibrahim alayhi salam, Abraham is 2500 BC. So let's say around about 900 BC or 800 BC, about 800 years before Isa alayhi salam, give or take, is Musa alayhi salam. Okay. So Ibn Taymiyyah is saying 800 BC, Allah on the mountain spoke to Musa alayhi salam. And that happened 800 BC. The Ash'aris will say, well, no, Allah's kalam is wahid, is one. It isn't broken up into parts such that one part of the kalam happens then and another part of the kalam happens there, and another part of the kalam happens 800 BC and another part of the kalam happens, 21st century. It's just wahid, it's one. And they have their strong arguments and rational proofs. Ibn Taymiyyah says the reason why the Ash'aris have to say that is because they believe that no hulul al-hawadith can exist in the divine essence. And they think that the lazim of this, the necessary corollary of this is, if you say that Allah spoke to Musa alayhi salam 800 BC, you're saying that there was a change in the divine, in the dhat of Allah. There was a change in Allah, and anything that changes is hawadith, is contingent. And therefore, this is not permissible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So because of the word hulul al-hawadith and its lawazim, because of this term contingencies and what it implies, and now that it's become a very strong pillar of Ash'ari theology or Maturidi theology, it makes us have to reinterpret certain verses concerning the af'alul ikhtiyariya, the divine acts that are chosen to be done whenever Allah wishes to them to be done, according to Ibn Taymiyyah. And if after hearing this, some of you think, what is that about? Then alhamdulillah, you have found out why Deobandi scholars in particular, historically, decided to skip most of this from at this depth level from the curriculum, and why you could live in a Deobandi community even as a very pious person, but not as an alim, or even as an alim, and never come across these issues. Why? Because 9 times out of 10, as Ghazali will later on say, these do nothing for a person's iman or ta'alluq, connection or connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If anything, they might have the opposite effect. So that is it. So all we need to now know is, oh, those people who say Ibn Taymiyyah was anti-Kalam, they are mistaken. They are either parroting off Orientalist accusations, okay, or they're just really mistaken, or they're getting it from someone who has no even basic understanding of what Ibn Taymiyyah's theology was about. That includes Salafis, that includes many Salafis who, even as a talib al-ilm, a Salafi student of knowledge who's done, 6 years in the Islamic University of Medina, and he graduated in Kulliyat al-Dawah, Kulliyat al-Sharia, the College of Dawah, the College of Sharia. You'll find that people like that haven't gone past a commentary on Aqidah Wasatiyah or Aqidah Tadmuriyah or something like this, some basic Aqidah text of Ibn Taymiyyah. They've not engaged anything to do with, his deep ilmul kalam and his kind of understanding of the philosophers or the Sunni mutakallimun. And you'll be hard pressed to find any major Salafi scholar. I could be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, you will be hard pressed to find any major Salafi scholar like the level of Sheikh Ibn Baz or Sheikh Ibn Uthaymeen or Sheikh Al-Albani rahimahumullah, or people like that, or today Sheikh Al-Fawzan, who actually has any lessons or any books going into this level of kalam. It's conspicuous by its absence from that set of people. One, because it has very little relevance to most Muslim lives, but I suspect the other thing is one really has to have an academic brilliance in this field, in this specific field, to even begin to unravel what is being said. And, how can I, as a talibul ilm, let's just say, so for me, Dr. Salim and I, in our local area, which we'll say the area of Redbridge, there are only a handful of scholars and tulabul ilm. There are loads and loads of Muslims with loads and loads of problems. And there are less than 10 serious scholars or students of knowledge in our area, of seriously seasoned. There might be more coming up. And so how can Dr. Salim or myself have the luxury to go into all of this when people are asking, how do I save my own iman? People are asking, does not wearing a hat break my prayer? People are asking all these really important, immediate questions. People are asking, that I'm having big problems in my marriage, this, that, and the other. People are literally asking that my daughter wants to have a sex change to a boy. She's 8 years old. Just last week, I spoke to parents. The boy is 11. He wants to become a girl. So where is the time that Dr. Salim or the ulama in the handful of ulama in Redbridge have the time for hulul al-hawadith, af'al al-ikhtiyariyya, kada wa kada wa kada? Where does that fit into priorities? That could also be another reason in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, why the Salafi ulama don't engage it. But, even if any one of us wanted to engage it, it's deep. It's really deep. So can I just read point 13 and finish the lesson for today? Because point 13 isn't point of discussion. It's just it's summing up the Hanbali position. And then next week we get into Ghazali, and it's really lovely. I love the way that Al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, just nails it and puts everything into perspective, because this is a man whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, not just for the khawas, the ulama, but he sent Al-Ghazali for the awam, for the lay people. And one of the brilliant things that he made Al-Ghazali do is he made Al-Ghazali re-center the ulama. Al-Ghazali was able to say, you know what, you think you're a good faqih? Are you a faqih like me? You think you're a good usuli? Are you a usuli like me? You think you're a good mutakallim? Are you a good mutakallim like me? But I am telling you, it is ma'arif of Allah. Ghazali says, really, all of this, if it doesn't serve ma'arif of Allah, of coming to know God, then really, you lot missed the point. So, 13. So what conclusion can we draw about the Hanbali school's view about ilm al-kalam? Well, the obvious one is that the school doesn't have a single unified stance. The reason is that the various reports concerning Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal's attitude towards kalam lead to vastly different conclusions. Undoubtedly, there is his clear condemnation of it, and yet there are words from him that permit it. And then there is his book, Ar-Radd al-Jahmiyya, a slim tract refuting certain innovators, not just with textual proofs, but with rational-based arguments to support the textual assertions. Taking all of this into consideration, the later leading Hanbali authorities, meaning from the 8th and the 9th century onwards, up until the 15th century, particularly those whose manuals, commentaries, and super commentaries of fiqh have now become the standard relied upon texts for teaching and fatwas over the past 600 years, such as Imam al-Buhuti, Ibn Najjar, al-Ba'li, Mari ibn Yusuf al-Karami. These are the great al-Hajjawi. These are the great imams who are relied upon for fiqh and fatwa in the Hanbali school from the 8th century onwards up until now. They tended to adopt the view that ilm al-kalam was lawful and legislated. Its role, however, was not as a discoverer of truths, but as a rational support to those axiomatic creedal truths found in the revelation. Ibn Hamdan's 7th Islamic century Nihayat al-Mubtadi'in fi Usul al-Din, his book on theology, has found widespread acceptance amongst the cream of the Hanbali scholars, such as Ibn Muflih, al-Mardawi, al-Hajjawi, al-Buhuti, and al-Safarini, and has been authoritatively cited by them. The same holds for its abridgment, Qala'id al-Iqyan, by Ibn Balban in the 11th century. That is the Hanbali position. Just one small point. Non-Hanbalis try to make a big deal. Someone asked me a question 2 weeks ago, and I know where it's coming from. Allah bless him. Non-Hanbalis try to make a big deal of Ibn al-Jawzi. And Ibn al-Jawzi, amongst the books that he wrote on theology, he didn't write much on because he wasn't a seasoned theologian, but he wrote 2 books on theology, a smaller one and a larger one. The small one is very famous, it's called Daf Shubahat al-Tashbih. He wrote that book because he thought a number of the Hanbali scholars at his time and just before him, and Ibn al-Jawzi dies in the year 597. 597 Hijri, Ibn al-Jawzi dies. Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani dies in 541 Hijri or 561 Hijri. Ibn Qudama dies in 620 Hijri. Majd ibn Taymiyyah, the grandfather of Ibn Taymiyyah, dies in 645 Hijri. Imam ibn Taymiyyah, the grandson, dies in 728 Hijri. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali dies in 795 Hijri. Ibn al-Jawzi wrote a book refuting some of the excesses of some Hanbali scholars, and he employed the method of ta'wil, of figurative interpretation in the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the year 580 onwards, meaning in the last 15-20 years of Ibn al-Jawzi's life, Ibn al-Jawzi was openly censured and openly rebuked by the Hanbali scholars, the leading Hanbali scholars of his time. In Aqidah, Ibn al-Jawzi is not considered to be upon the Hanbali way, and he himself accepts that. So to try to say Ibn al-Jawzi's writings on theology represent the true Hanbalism, it's false, it's a lie. It's just people trying to impress their own writings, their own views. No, he was rebuked not just by the leading Hanbali Imams of the time, like Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi, but even two of the sons of Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani, one who was a significant scholar in the Hanbali school, rebuked him. They all agreed that he should be banished from Baghdad, and he was banished. And it sounds really unfair. The man is about 80 years old, right? 75, 8 years, and they banished him from his hometown of Baghdad to Wasit, on kind of somewhere on the outskirts, and he lives in this small little shack until about 7 or 8 years, 10 years later, he's allowed to go, not 10 years, less than that, he's allowed to come back. And why? Because his writings have seriously deviated from what they consider to be Sunni thought, and definitely Sunni Hanbali thought. So he is totally not anywhere mainstream Hanbali. Secondly, Ibn al-Jawzi in fiqh, he's not considered to be one of the highest imams. He's considered to be a great imam in the school, but his rank as a faqih is not, it doesn't rank in the top 4 or top 5. It possibly doesn't even rank in the top 10. How do we know this? Because like the other schools, I'm sure like the Hanafi school, we have detailed books from the great scholars, okay, of the past that detail the position of every Hanbali scholar on the issues of fiqh. Imam al-Mardawi's Al-Insaf fi ma'rifati rajihi min al-khilaf is one of those source books that if you want to know what Hanbali scholars said, what thing on what position, then that's the book that to go to. Okay, for example, that was written in the 9th century. And Ibn al-Jawzi's name comes up now and again, but the madhab is built on 4 or 5 main characters, the later madhab. The 2 pillars, we're talking about the later madhab when it becomes fully developed. The 2 pillars are Ibn Qudama and Majd ibn Taymiyyah. They are considered to be the shaykhan, the 2 shaykhs of the school. Ibn Qudama al-Maqdisi and Majd ibn Taymiyyah. He is the grandfather of the famous Ibn Taymiyyah or the infamous Ibn Taymiyyah, depending upon how you look at him. And then the 3rd or 4th, after these 2, the 3rd or 4th major figure of the school is possibly Ibn Taymiyyah, even though Ibn Taymiyyah disagreed with a number of positions in the madhab, but the fact that the Hanbalis themselves, who disagree with Ibn Taymiyyah on some of these issues, okay, they consider him to be either the 3rd or the 4th most important faqih in the madhab. And you can see that in Al-Insaf and in other books that are relied upon, how they refer to Ibn Taymiyyah and what rank they give him. The Hanbali scholars, not Lalupanjus and lay people like me or Tulab al-Ilm like me, the Hanbali ulama whose books are mu'tamad, relied upon, or mashhur, okay, relied upon, they either consider Ibn Taymiyyah mujtahid mutlaq, and there's a difference of opinion amongst the Hanbalis whether he was mujtahid mutlaq, but they all agree he was mujtahid fil madhab. And Ibn Taymiyyah's isnad is one of the highest isnads in the school. Forget about this. I mean, it doesn't all depend on isnad. You have to also have the academic ability. But his isnad is, he took fiqh by way of his father from his grandfather. This Taymiyyah chain is one of the greatest chains of Hanbali fiqh. And his second teacher was Ibn Abi Umar. I mean, there was many teachers he had, but Ibn Abi Umar was the main student of Ibn Qudamah. So Ibn Taymiyyah's isnad in Hanbali fiqh is just 1,000 times better than Ibn al-Jawzi's. I'm mentioning this because we have to have insaf, justice. We have to follow haqq, truth, and not dhan, speculation. And there cannot be any ta'assub. There cannot be any bigotry or partisanship. It is not right for anyone to put Ibn al-Jawzi in a maqam, a station in Hanbali, in the Hanbali school that none of the Hanbalis have given him. No Hanafi, no Shafi'i, no Maliki has that right at all. They may do it by way of mistake, by way of poor reading, and inshallah their excuse, may Allah reward them. But they don't have that right. Just like it would apply the other way around. It's not for me to say who are the great Hanafi scholars and put, I don't know, and put Ibn Abidin, okay, Ash-Shami above Abu Yusuf. Why? Because did Abu Yusuf write books like Ibn Abidin? Well, he didn't, because Abu Yusuf was, in one period of early Islam, and Ibn Abidin came, he stood on the shoulder of giants and was a giant himself. But when you stand on the shoulders of giants, you can write much more. Just like you wouldn't accept that from someone like me. The Hanbalis don't accept these things from other than, and the difference is the Hanbali school isn't very well understood by people. It's not like the Hanafi or the Shafi school that is, mashallah, the history and its widespreadness is known. So so please be careful what you understand of Hanbali school. Take it from relied upon committed Hanbali authorities. It is not Salafis, it's not Bin Baz or Ibn Abdul Wahhab or someone saying Ibn Taymiyyah standing in the Hanbali school is like this. It is the Hanbali scholars themselves before Ibn Abdul Wahhab was even born who are saying this. Now, does that make all of his stances right? Are they all Hanbali? No, there are a number of views he has that are not part of the school, and sometimes the scholars mention it and they just say Shaykh al-Islam said or the Shaykh said, just to show that is Ibn Taymiyyah's view, but actually we have another view. Ibn al-Jawzi just doesn't feature into this. He was censured because whatever view the Hanbalis have, they do not allow ta'wil. The Ash'ari say there are two types of views on sifat, tafweed and ta'wil. The Hanbalis don't allow ta'wil. They believe there is an ijma' of the Salaf against ta'wil. And Ibn al-Jawzi, in his later life, he accepted ta'wil as the normative position in theology and sifat. So we can't take someone who is not mu'tamad in the school in theology to be representative of the Hanbali school. You may say that Ibn al-Jawzi is more correct than Ibn Qudamah. That's fine, that's different. But we're talking about the school. He doesn't represent the school. I hope that's clear, inshallah ta'ala. And I said that because there was a question 2 weeks ago. I thought I'd just clarify that. And, I would just say beware of contemporary scholars. Sheikh Sayyid al-Fawda, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, for example, he's really hardcore. He's a hardcore Ash'ari. Even some of the Ash'aris, they consider him a bit too much shiddah. Wallah, what the truth is. But, his thing on, well, Ibn Qudamah is Mujassim, and Sheikh Abdul Qadir al-Jani is a Mujassim, and this one is a Mujassim, and this one is a Mujassim. And in fact, out of the Hanbalis, there's only 3 or 4 people who are not Mujassima. He could be right, but unlikely, inshallah, unlikely.
Jazakallahu khairan, inshallah ta'ala. If there was any pressing question on the topic, you can ask, and then inshallah we'll finish it off. In fact, it's time for Maghrib here now. We're just having adhan as we speak. So someone just sent a question. I have a question. Go on, Malad bhai, you can open your.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah for the great session. Just a couple of things. I did found a book of the Sherman Jackson for the Islam and the problem of the black suffering. In that book, there is a chart which actually give the difference. Is include the Ibn Taymiyyah's for the basic position of the four scholars, for the Mu'tazilas, Asharis, everyone, and that can give like a high level chart in that one.
MashaAllah.
Just want to mention that.
Jazakumullah khair. Dr. Sherman's book on the Black Americans, you wouldn't think it of the title, but mashallah, just in English, an introduction to the some of the Kalam ideas, some of the really basic Kalam ideas of Asharis and traditionalists, Athari, Salafi, Hanbalis. It's a good book, mashallah, even though it's like kind of Black American Muslims. It's fantastic book, mashallah.
Yeah, that's the one. The name is the Islam and the problem of the black suffering.
Absolutely, and it's really good because he takes on this issue of theology about suffering. He does it really well. It's a book worth reading, inshallah ta'ala, if you can read it, if you can get it.
Yeah, that's why I just want to mention that. So
may Allah bless you. May Allah bless you for that, and the chart in there, inshallah, will be very helpful, inshallah. May Allah bless you.
It's not an easy book to read, so we probably push some question by Salim Bhai to you that some of the terminologies is kind of foreign to me, and I think those are the things we probably need some insight. Inshallah, in the coming days.
I was talking about Dr. Sherman Jackson.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. So Dr. Sherman Jackson in the West is considered, along with Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad, to be the two from the Muslim community, to be the two best professors and academics within the Muslim community and the wider Western Islamic studies. Dr. Sherman's has a phenomenal record, and so you might ask me about terminology and whatever. I might have to go and ask someone else. Inshallah ta'ala, let's see what we can do. But may Allah hafidhullah ta'ala, he's a really, and he in character, and mashallah, I spent some time with Dr. Sherman. He subhanallah, he's really good. He really
I able to attend a couple of sessions, like 2-week sessions with him, alhamdulillah. So
mashallah.
I think that we read his book Sufism for non-Sufis.
Of Ibn Ata'illah, as a translation of Ibn, that's really good, mashallah. That's really nice, mashallah.
Final question from Brother Mansoor Khan. We just
the question was regarding the initial comments. As you said, that there are many issues being created nowadays regarding the theory of evolution and also like the quantum physics and those things which are actually shaking the imans of a lot of people. But what if we tackle this problem in a way that because all of these issues regarding the Aqidah are being created by things which are being justified by science, and science itself is not something that is static, it's very dynamic and changing all the time. So how can we base something of an Aqidah or refute or support Aqidah by something that is in itself never solid? It's always fluid and dynamic, and it will change. Maybe science is saying something today, and after 30 years, it may refute itself. And if something is so fragile in its behavior, how can it be used to supplement anything else, which is much more solid and much more higher at stakes? That's one. Another thing is, in contemporary days, we see opinions by certain people, certain group of people. I would not name them, but they say that you can pick and choose from all the different schools of Sunni schools. You can take something from Maliki and something from Hanafi according to your ease, rather than strictly following one school. How big of a problem is that in light of the traditional thinking of all the ulama in each of these schools regarding this particular behavior?
The second question, your last question, we'll have to defer for another day, another time, because it's off topic. As important as it is, in fact, it's actually more practically important than all of this Kalam theology in one sense, but but it is off topic, so I won't deal with it now. We can deal with it at some other time, inshallah ta'ala. Dr. Salim could remind us of that. The first issue is, mashallah, very briefly, so this is not a deep answer, very briefly. In one sense, we can say, yes, you're right. Since science is evolving, and some things which it says now, it will say the opposite later on. So how can we incorporate things like that into the Aqidah? One of the ways to do it is simply to say, let us take what science is saying now. For example, let us take what evolution is saying now. Let us take mainstream evolutionary biology in whatever it's saying, and we will examine that in the light of the Muslim Aqidah to see what parts we can accept and what parts we cannot, what parts we ourselves can refute using science, and what parts can be accepted. So we can start with, let's take what they're saying now, not let's believe in that to be the truth, and no, let's just take it as what they're saying. So let's not argue the fossil records, and let's not argue the genetic records of the genetic markers in evolutionary biology. Let's not argue against what Dawkins is saying as the standard model of evolutionary biology. Let's just say, okay, let's assume that to be true. Likewise, in quantum physics, let's assume X, Y, Z to be true. Based upon that, what would Islam say? So we can do it that way. The second way is to be a bit more detailed and say, look, it's not quite true to say that science is evolving. Of course, it is true that science is evolving, but not everything in science evolves. So now we know that, that water is made of hydrogen and oxygen molecules. This is not something which is going to evolve in the future. It's something that is going to be static, that, water is made of the combination of these two different atoms, hydrogen and oxygen atoms. But what is the smallest part? What is the smallest unit in those atoms? Is it the proton, neutron, electron? Or can they be broken down into various types of quarks? And can quarks be broken down? Can they be broken down? Because we know of quarks, into something smaller, ultimately strings perhaps. That could evolve. So there are some things in science that don't evolve. They are just factual. They are kind of haqq. They are kind of haqq, period. And there are other things from science which will evolve due to different models, due to different empirical evidences, and so on and so forth. So we need to be a bit clear about that. Otherwise, we're making science to look like, it's just all of it is just speculative, and it's not. Some of it is so factual, nothing will change. And some of it is very factual, but because it's based upon induction, something exceptional could change the rule. And some of it is speculative and probabilistic, and that is likely to change. Okay, so two things: understanding what science is, and it's always worth reading philosophy of science just to understand what science is about. Even as a doctor or as an engineer or as as a physicist, it's worth reading philosophy of science just to understand the philosophical principles behind the scientific enterprise, inshallah ta'ala, if we haven't already done so. Otherwise we take what they say, evolution, you're saying this, okay, let's assume it to be true, then Islam will say ABC about it.
Jazakallah khair, inshallah ta'ala. We'll take your leave. We've gone on just a little bit over time. Inshallah ta'ala, within a couple of weeks, it should all be sorted out when the clock moves forward. And we would have plenty of time, inshallah ta'ala. We can make slightly longer session for question and answer. Apologies for that. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll keep on with the time for the time being. Jazakallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you to all of you.